Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Deeper into Isaiah series. My name is Steve Brind and I'll be leading you through this amazing section of God's Word. We're looking tonight at Isaiah chapter 13, chapter 14, chapter 21 and chapter 23. As we know, Isaiah is a trilogy. It's 3 books in one, together with an introduction. That first 5 chapters is an introduction. And we're currently working our way through chapters 6 to 37, which we've described as the threat of Assyria. But in the threat of Assyria, Isaiah sees a future, an eschatological element. Eschatology is really just the study of the end times, of the future, of the end of the world. And in this section, Isaiah is talking about future enemies, that is Babylon and Tyre. In one sense, they're future enemies because Babylon had not yet become a world superpower, not yet taken on the mantle that Assyria left behind, but it was going to do so, and at that point it would sweep across the whole known world. But also future because Babylon is seen then as a picture into the future of how God is going to deal with all the nations. Babylon becomes a picture of ultimate evil, the devil. And of course the judgment of Satan is still future. Let's just recap what we've talked about the last couple of weeks, how to read the judgment chapters of the Bible. First of all, we understand from these judgment chapters the unchanging character of God. We understand the picture of God's people, that is, the people of Israel are seen as a picture of the people of God across all time. And in the New Testament, that comes through as the church, that is, as people who are saved by grace. What is the purpose of judgment? We've seen that God's purpose is in order to bring about righteousness on the earth, is to bring about his goodness, which is what he wants to do with our world. And then we see the picture of the enemies, the world, the flesh and the devil. And we've talked in the last 2 sections about the world and the flesh, and in this section we're going to talk about the devil. We're thinking specifically about the nations of Babylon and Tyre. Babylon, as we've said, was a nation that became an empire. And as Isaiah is writing, they've not yet taken up that place as superpower. At the time of Isaiah's writing, Assyria is the superpower, and you'll see Assyria up in the north of the map there. You'll see Babylon way down on the right-hand side. And you'll see on the left-hand side, you might see tucked in there between Samaria and Byblos is the town of Tyre, the city of Tyre. And those are the 2 nations that we're going to be talking about in this particular section. We're talking about future enemies then. Babylon. What do we know about Babylon? Well, it was a centre of culture, but it was a centre of anti-God culture. Now, they did believe in gods, they did believe in religion, and they believed in many superstitions, but they crucially did not believe in the one true God. And yet, Babylon and Babylonian culture was the height of culture at that time. The first place we discover Babylon is in the Tower of Babel, or Babel. It's what gives its name to Babylon. And we discover this idea of ziggurats, that is, trying to build a tower up to God and to reach up to the heavens. And if we're being foolish about this, we think, well, they were trying to build a very tall tower so they could climb to God. But that's actually not the case at all. They were building a very tall tower so that they could read the stars. And not as an astronomer, not as a scientist, but as an astrologer. That is, to be able to discover from what the stars were aligned to show them what the future might be. Abraham, who comes from Ur of the Chaldees, is in the same place where a ziggurat was built. In fact, if you go to the British Museum, you can see how this has been discovered and dug up. You can discover how that there was a ziggurat at Ur of the Chaldees. They used it for stargazing, as we say, in order to discover what the future might tell us. Ur of the Chaldees, which leads us on to this idea of the Chaldees. What do we mean by the Chaldees? Well, actually we mean the Chaldean religion or culture, which was the bedrock and the basis of Babylon. And this Chaldean culture had a great effect on many other cultures, including, for example, Egypt. So you see Joseph's dreams and Pharaoh's dream. Why were dreams so important? Answer, because in the Chaldean religion, Dreams were really significant. You could tell what was going to happen if someone gave you a dream. The Chaldean magicians in the courts of Pharaoh. The magicians who did their magical arts when Moses did those great miracles in front of them, and they were able to copy some of them through that Chaldean magic. You can see the kind of approach that the Chaldean or Babylonian culture had. And then there's the Chaldean religion in Daniel, all about dreams and magi and advisors and so on. And then finally, of course, we think about magi. Well, these were the same people who came to visit Jesus from the same culture. They were the wise men who brought him gifts. They were from the east. They were from Babylon. The Babylonian Empire was known for its elegance, for its wealth, for its opulence, for its luxury. It was known for being powerful under Nebuchadnezzar, yes, but with the purpose of elegance and luxury. Babylon is subtle. Babylon woos you. Babylon draws you in. And when the people of Judah were taken captive by the Babylonians some years later, the best of those people were brought to become part of Babylonian society. They basically said, come into us, assimilate with us, be part of us, and join in the greatness that is Babylon. Think about the statue of gold that Nebuchadnezzar made in the book of Daniel. That statue of gold that symbolised his pride. Gold, of course, because it's the very best. And Nebuchadnezzar had that dream in which the statue was made up, but then was destroyed by the rock that came down the mountain. And that rock we now know to be Jesus. And yet it didn't stop Nebuchadnezzar from building his statue out of gold to say, look at me, I'm the greatest. And as a result of that pride, of course, we know pride comes before a fall. And indeed, that did happen to Nebuchadnezzar. He became mad when he entered into his pride in such a great way. He looked out and he said, look how wonderful I am and everything that I have built. And God said, I'm going to make you into a fool. And he went and lived outside, became absolutely mad, lived like an animal, grew long hair and long fingernails, and for a number of years lived in that state until he came out of his madness. It is this context that we need as we come to this idea of Babylon and the judgment against Babylon. Now we understand that it is a culture completely set up against the one true God. And in fact, the Bible can be described as a tale of two cities. A tale of this great city of Jerusalem, the bride coming out of heaven, the perfect city, the place where Zion is built, where God has his dwelling place, and against that, the city of Babylon, the city of superstition, of astrology, of false religion, of everything that seeks to win by pleasure and by culture and by setting itself up against God. Babylon is all about pride. What does God have to say to Babylon through Isaiah? First of all, we see the day of the Lord and judgment on evil. See, says Isaiah, the day of the Lord is coming, a cruel day, with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land desolate and to destroy the sinners within it. And the stars of heaven and their constellations will not show their light, and the rising sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. These are incredible words of judgment. And the judgment against Babylon almost becomes like a symbol of the judgment of the whole world. It is Babylon against Jerusalem. It is Babylon against God. And God says there's a day coming when all that is evil will be destroyed. The day of the Lord, judgment on evil. See how it comes together with great cosmic and seismic changes in the world. The stars of the heaven will not show their light. The sun will be darkened. The moon will not give its light. This is reminiscent of Joel chapter 2, then picked up by Peter in Acts chapter 2, then picked up again in Revelation. These are apocalyptic type words. Isaiah is delving now into the end times, into eschatology. Therefore I'll make the heavens tremble, and the earth will shake from its place at the wrath of the Lord Almighty in his burning anger. This is what God is saying to Babylon. He's saying, I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth, and you will be, if you like, emblematic, symptomatic of what will happen to the whole world. Wail, says the Lord, the day of destruction is near. It will come like destruction from the Almighty. and I will make the heavens tremble and the earth shake from its place. This reminds us of 2 Peter chapter 3, when Peter says that when the day of the Lord comes, then the elements themselves will be burned up with fire. We might say, why would that be? Why would God choose to act in this way? And we discover from Isaiah's writing that the day of the Lord is deserved. Because Babylon is a picture of sin and the devil. The ultimate sin of the devil is pride. I will be like God. And he says this, I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their sins. I will put an end to the arrogance of the haughty, and I will humble the pride of the ruthless. You see, the day of the Lord is deserved. See, I will stir up against them the Medes. That the Medo-Persian Empire came in and destroyed Babylon after their empire had risen up. The Medes, it says, did not care for silver, had no delight in gold. In other words, they were not similar to the Babylonians. They weren't after luxury. They were simply after power. And Babylon, the jewel of kingdoms, the pride and glory of the Babylonians, will be overthrown by God. Contrast with the Medes, who just so loved power. They were barbarians by contrast, but nevertheless Babylon would fall. In every other chapter we've talked about so far, there has been some compassion, there has been some mercy. But in these verses there is no mercy for Babylon. There is no compassion for the nation of the Babylonians. And yet within these chapters there is compassion. But it's compassion for Jacob, compassion for Israel, compassion for God's people. You see, the Lord will have compassion on Jacob, it says in chapter 14. Once again he will choose Israel and will settle them in their own land. Foreigners will join them and unite with the descendants of Jacob. And on that day the Lord will give you relief from your suffering and turmoil and from the harsh labour forced on you, and you will take up a taunt against the king of Babylon. There is no mercy for the king of Babylon. Why not? Did God really hate Babylon as a nation? No, not at all. This was a picture of God's judgment on evil. And the king of Babylon is a picture of Satan, the devil himself. We see Babylon in the realm of the dead in chapter 14. The realm of the dead below you is all astir to meet you at your coming. The picture here is really quite graphic. It's talking about how the Babylonians would go down to the grave, and as they go down into the realm of the dead, into hell itself, the spirits of the departed who are leaders in the world, they come and greet. They say, ha ha, you were strong, but you become weak just like us. All your pomp has been broken, and all the kings of the nations lie in state in your own tomb, but you are cast out of your tomb like a rejected branch. There is no rest for the wicked, is the idea. There is no rest for Babylon because they go down to everlasting torment. And it speaks to us about those end verses of Revelation when death and sin and hell and Hades and the devil are thrown together into the lake of fire, always to be tormented, never to have rest. These are the things that God's talking about. He's passionate about showing us that evil will be destroyed and will not have a final rest. Whereas every other nation in these sections, there's mercy, there's judgment, there's a remnant will return. There'll be some that are joined together with God's people. With Babylon, it is not the case. With Babylon, there is no rest. Babylon we see is a picture of the devil. And it comes more closely and more sharply into focus in the later verses of chapter 14. How have you fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn? You've been cast down to earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you were brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit. That idea of the morning star is another name for Satan himself, the son of the dawn, cast down to earth. And it talks in Revelation about Satan and his angels were cast down to the earth. Jesus says, I saw Satan fall like lightning. You who once laid low the earth, and for now, for this brief period of time, Satan has the opportunity to work upon the earth, but God says a time is coming when I will cast him down. And the king of Babylon becomes a picture for what will happen to Satan himself. What do we know about the devil? We know that he began in his evil through pride. I will be like God. I will take the place of God. I want to stand in God's place as if I'm as good as him. I will ascend, says Satan, to the heavens. I'll raise my throne above the stars of God. And the ziggurats that were built as ways of being able to look to the stars were ways that have been able to say, look, we can reach up to God. We can see great things. We can see mighty mysteries. We can have occult experiences which will enable us to know. This is what Satan is all about. Did God really say, if you taste of the fruit, you will be like God. You will know what God knows. I can give you special knowledge. I can give you all the kingdoms of the earth. I can make you to ascend. I can make you like the Most High. But, says God, you will be brought down to the depths of the pit. Babylon, a picture of evil, is seen in Revelation chapter 18. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, I'll show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters. There's strong words, eh? With her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated by the wine of her adulteries. And then the angel carried me away in the spirit to a desert, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast covered with blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns, and the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, and was glittering with gold, precious stones and pearls, and she held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries, and the name written on her forehead was a mystery. Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and abominations of the earth. Oh boy. Babylon is pictured here as the great prostitute, and I saw the woman who was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who poured testimony to Jesus. In other words, Babylon is completely opposite to and in contrast to the holy ones and the holy city of Jerusalem. And Babylon is seen as a prostitute, as taking money from lewd behaviour, from rude and awful behaviour that should not be talked about. And yet she lords it up and sits upon the beast, showing off her greatness. This is what Nebuchadnezzar did. It's the sin of pride. It's the ultimate sin of the devil. It's ultimate evil. I want to say that when we look at the culture that is around us, and we think about that nature of evil, we often don't think actually that something cultured and wonderful and lovely could be so evil, and yet we discover that Satan masquerades as an angel of light. And we discover actually that when we start looking at our culture and some of the things that are in it, some of the ways in which people act and behave, it can seem very intellectual, very clever. And yet, if it is anti-God, it is thrust through with Babylon. Dare we say that Babylon stalks the halls of our universities with the anti-God message of so many of the subjects that come up. Now, this is not to speak against learning or not to speak against education. Education's fantastic, it's wonderful. But as God's people, we guard ourselves against anything which sets out to oppose God and his views and his principles. This calls for patient endurance on the part of the saints, as it says in Revelation. And it calls for a discerning mind, to look for those ways in which the world and the devil are subtly influencing us in terms of our attitudes and our thoughts and our intellectual pride. Revelation describes it like this: fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. And where did John get that from? Well, he got it from Isaiah. Isaiah 21, Babylon has fallen, fallen. All the images of its gods lie shattered on the ground. Ultimately, says God, I will destroy Babylon. And though it may be important right now, though it may be significant right now, there comes a day in which that culture that is anti-God will be destroyed. I think of it now as we even look at the way that the BBC reports on many aspects in our world, describing things which are evil as if they're good. I think about it when we talk about the sorts of cultural things that we see in our society, even the really sort of positive ones. I think about the way that films are made, even very highbrow films. I think about the plays that are in the theatre. I think about the ways in which philosophy moves and the books that are written, and they seem very intelligent and very cultural. And yet if they're anti-God, they are Babylon. What do we do with this as God's people? We're living in this world. We can't avoid that. In fact, we shouldn't avoid that. But it calls for wisdom and insight, not to be drawn into the deception of the devil. What do we say then about the second enemy, the enemy of Tyre? Tyre was known for its ships, for its great sailors. It was a centre of trade. It was a seafaring nation, and as a result it attracted great luxury and wealth. Why? Because all of the trade that came through Tyre and then went out from their ships across the Mediterranean to Africa, to parts of Europe, etc., brought great luxuries and wealth to Tyre. In Isaiah, you see it's described in this way. At the end of 70 years, the Lord will deal with Tyre. She will return to her lucrative prostitution and will ply her trade with all the kingdoms on the face of the earth. Again, we've got this idea of prostitution, of selling oneself. Ultimately, this is what we talk about with these two enemies. It's selling oneself to something else. With Babylon, it's selling oneself to pride. With Tyre, it's selling oneself to luxuries and to pleasure and to riches. And God says about Tyre that Tyre will be destroyed and left without house or harbour. The Lord Almighty planned it to bring down her pride in all her splendour and to humble all who are renowned on the earth. You see, what God is saying is this, is that if you try and make it yourself, if you're a self-made man, if you've risen up by yourself and if you've provided by your own strength and your own power and your own luxuries, then ultimately you're standing against God. This is the devil. That's extraordinary. We would never think of that, would we? New Testament talks about this. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And Tyre was a place of great riches, and yet it was a place that was shot through with evil as a result. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It isn't freedom to be rich, you know. It's not freedom to chase after riches and luxury. That way lies slavery. It gives up yourself, your dignity, and your honour for nothing of substance and for nothing that will last. Jesus says, store up riches in heaven, and you will be truly rich, where rust and moth cannot destroy. What was going to happen to my money when I die? It passes on to somebody else, and I don't see it anymore, and it's of no interest to me. What happens if the stock market crashes? What happens if there's a recession in our country? Well, of course, the value of my money goes down. Well, what value is it to me then? What happens if there's some kind of disaster happens and I have to spend it all out? Well, it's gone. But righteousness that lasts forever, that is stored up in heaven as riches, that's worth something. That's eternal, and that lasts. Once again, we see that the nation of Tyre stands actually for the devil. In an extraordinary passage in Ezekiel, we won't read it all, but I'll leave it up there for you to see. An extraordinary passage in Ezekiel, the king of Tyre is seen as a picture of the devil. Listen to these words. You are the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adored you. You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. You were blameless in all your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. Through your widespread trade you are filled with violence and you sin, and so I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God. I expelled you, guardian cherub, from the fiery stones. Your heart became proud. I threw you to the earth. A fire came out from you and consumed you. I reduced you to ashes. You will come to a horrible end, and you will be no more. These verses, whilst they were written originally to the king of Tyre, actually speak forward eschatologically, that is, in a future sense, towards the destruction of Satan himself. Oh, Satan, who was perfect in every way, he was made to be beautiful, and yet he fell due to his pride and his love of everything for himself. These words are spoken to us as a warning, so that we might understand that it will not do us good to chase after wealth, to chase after luxury, to chase after our own pleasure. This is the way of folly, and yet our society is so full of it, and even our churches are so full of it. Our Christian society is so full of it. Health and wealth and prosperity gospel, and it's an absolute anathema to God. It's against what God has for us. Well, we may be wealthy, God may give us money, and he may give us health, and that would be wonderful, and praise God for it. But the chasing after these things is at the very root of evil itself. The same picture is picked up by John in Revelation. Tyre in Revelation is seen as an ally of fallen Babylon, and every sea captain and all who travel through the sea, the sailors and all who earn their living from the sea, stand far off, and they see the smoke of her burning, and they exclaim, "Was there ever a city like this great city of Babylon?" And they throw dust on their heads, and with weeping and mourning cry out, "Woe to you, great city, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour she's been brought to ruin." And those dual enemies of pride and of the love of money, the love of wealth, are thrown together into the lake of fire for all eternity. Why? Why is Babylon and Tyre so serious? Why are these two nations so serious in terms of what God says? Because they stand ultimately against him. God says, "I want you to delight in me, not in riches. I want you to love me, not yourself. Don't be so consumed by self, by pride, by luxury, that you miss out on me. I am the God who sustains you. I give you everything. I'm sufficient. I'm enough." And when we say to the Lord, "Lord, I desire you. You're the desire of my heart," then we have reached that high point, the Mount of Zion. We do not need to be on these sacred ziggurats trying to reach out to find out what will happen in the future. We simply need to rely on a God who has given us all things richly through Jesus Christ. And so as we've gone deeper into Isaiah and discovered these future enemies, we've seen that God is going to ultimately bring about the end of evil. And that's a wonderful thing, and we're so pleased about that. But evil has a face that we did not expect, hey? The face of evil is pride. The face of evil is luxury. The face of evil is wealth for its own sake. And God says about each of these things, cast them far from yourselves, throw them out, drive them away from yourselves, and instead come into deep relationship with me, into deep satisfaction in me, and come into deep trust in my way and my future. Isaiah's going to unpack some more of this in the next section as he starts to talk so much about the desires of our hearts. But for now, I'll pick up that God says to us that he wants us to stand against the world, the flesh, and the devil, to be aware of those three things that might play into our situations. And to stand for him, to stand by faith, as was spoken way back to King Ahaz. If you do not stand by faith, you will not stand at all. So stand by faith. Trust in me, for I'm trustworthy. When everything else around is shaken, yet I will still stand, and you will stand with me if you rely on me and trust in me.